Order, order. We start with questions to the Secretary of State for Wales, Richard Thomson.
One, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 1 and 14 together. The Welsh Government is well funded to deliver public services in Wales. As a result of the autumn statement, Welsh Government funding is increasing by around £1.2 billion over the next 2 years, and that is on top of the additional £2.5 billion a year on average announced at Spending Review. The Prime Minister has also been clear that we will halve inflation to ease the cost of living.
Richard Thomson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State says that the budget is increasing by £1.2 billion over the next 2 years, but of course inflation has already eroded the effective purchasing power of the Welsh Government in the current year by £1 billion. Could I ask the Secretary of State, since the UK Government is responsible for approximately 80% of the resource base of the Welsh Government, what further representations does he plan to make to the Chancellor of the Exchequer to ensure that that purchasing power for essential public services in Wales is made good?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the overall funding amounts for the devolved administrations, including the Welsh Government, have actually still increased in real terms over the period, despite the impact of inflation. But if the honourable gentleman is serious about dealing with inflation, then I hope he will support this government as it proposes to halve inflation over the coming year. But in doing so, we'll need to be carefully controlling public spending in areas such as pay.
Speaker, the Institute of Welsh Affairs has said that budgetary pressures highlight the impotence of Welsh devolution and that tax scheme changes by the Scottish Government are a model that would help Wales' financial situation. If the UK Government won't provide the vital increase to devolved budgets, will the Minister explore devolving similar tax-varying powers to Wales, as in Scotland, to help the Welsh Government mitigate the Tory mismanagement from this place?
Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, I'm not quite sure I follow what the honourable gentleman is saying, because of course the Welsh Government do actually have tax-varying powers. It's just that they've chosen not to use them because the Welsh Government recognise that tax has already increased about as far as it's sensible to increase taxes, which mean that all of us have to deal with the constraints that have come about as a result of the very difficult economic situation we face due to COVID and then the impact of a land war in the Ukraine.
Jonathan Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Inflation, of course, causes pressure, but it is also true that Wales gets £1.20 per head for public services for every £1 in England. Yet the Welsh Labour-run government spends less than this on their public services. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that ruinous Welsh Labour government should stop wasting the money on things like the Senedd expansion and instead spend money where it's needed, tackling the backlogs in hospitals and stopping the decline of education in Wales?
Mr. Speaker, I agree absolutely with my honourable friend. He's absolutely right about that. There is money being wasted in the Senedd on, for example, up to £100 million, increasing the number of Senedd members at a time of economic difficulty. And I hope that the honourable members who are chuntering on the other side of the House are listening carefully to what my honourable friend has had to say.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 2, 6 and 13 together. I understand that people across the UK are worried about the cost of living, which is why we have taken decisive action to support households and businesses across the UK whilst remaining fiscally responsible. And this support includes a £26 billion package for the next financial year, which will be targeted at protecting the most vulnerable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Almost half of UK-wide adults say the cost of living crisis is harming their mental health, and this rises to 61% of Welsh adults. Devolved initiatives such as the Fuel Support Scheme in Wales help, but inflation and UK Government cuts put such schemes in jeopardy. So how does the Minister justify his Government's repeated refusal to support devolved governments to tackle the crisis his party has created?
Mr. Speaker, I first of all would fully acknowledge there is a cost of living crisis at the moment, and it's come about because the UK Government have rightly had to spend hundreds of millions of pounds dealing with the COVID pandemic, and then we have seen inflation increasing through the roof as a result of a land war in the Ukraine. So I recognise that there is a cost of living crisis that is being faced by countries across the whole of the Western world at the moment. The UK Government has certainly not cut funding. We've increased funding for the devolved administrations. We've increased money for the National Health Service, and it's a shame that in Wales that funding is not being fully passed on to the National Health Service, and frankly the Welsh Labour Government, in terms of the NHS, are getting more money and delivering a lower service.
Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Sarah and her children could not celebrate Christmas this year. They were crippled by fear of bailiffs and being made homeless in -2-degree weather outside. The toll this has taken on her mental health is unimaginable, and she said to me, "My children and I will just break." A YouGov poll out this week showed that this Tory-made cost of living crisis has impacted hugely on people's mental health in Wales, significantly more than elsewhere. 13 years of Tory government has crippled this country. Cardiff Council is already 23 million worse off. Is the Welsh Secretary going to push my constituents to breaking point?
Mr. Speaker, there's a cost of living crisis that's going on all over the world at the moment. This government has acknowledged that and faced up to it, and that is why we have prioritised help for the least well off. That is why this government have made sure that the minimum wage has risen in line with inflation, that pensions have risen in line with inflation, that benefits have risen in line with inflation. Those people on benefits will receive a £900 payment, pensioners getting a £300 payment, households with disability getting a £150 payment. At all times through these crises, which have not been caused by this UK government, we have targeted our help at the most vulnerable in society.
Mr. Speaker, the government has announced that support for homes and businesses connected to the mains gas grid will be extended for another year, but it seems the single round of alternative funding announced for off-grid homes will be expected to last the full 18 months. Notwithstanding the fact that the first payment to off-grid homes is still to be made, will the Secretary of State push colleagues in Bays and the Treasury to bring about a second round of the alternative funding to provide support for off-grid premises ahead of next winter?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is of course correct to say that the UK government have recognised that those who are off-grid are facing an increase in costs. It hasn't been as sharp as those who are on-grid, and I think that the figures reflect that. But I note the honourable gentleman's comments about the fact that the full details of that payment haven't yet been made fully clear, and I'm sure my colleagues in Bays will have noted his question and will be coming forward shortly with more information about that payment.
Shall the Secretary of State, Jo Stevens?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This month has seen dreadful news for steel businesses and steel workers in Wales. As an energy-intensive industry, their operating costs during the cost of living crisis have rocketed. 13 years of Conservative governments have seen decline, offshored jobs and damaged communities. Steel is integral to a modern economy, and Labour will put Welsh and UK steel at the heart of our wider industrial policy, building wind turbines, railways and investing in carbon capture storage and hydrogen infrastructure. Other than creating a cost of living crisis, what's his government's plan for our steel industry and steel workers' jobs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, the news from Liberty in Newport was very disappointing and is very concerning for many people, and that has not come about as a result of actions by the UK government. So I think the honourable lady will recognise there are other issues that are pertaining there. But the UK government is completely committed to the steel industry. We demonstrated that with a £30 million loan to CELSA during the COVID crisis. We've demonstrated it with the various schemes that have been brought forward to support high energy using industries. We are developing a scheme which will enable industries such as Tata to decarbonise, and we are also in discussion with Tata about how we can support them further over the coming years.
Jo Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, steelworkers need a government on their side, and the industry needs a partner that can provide stability and not sticking plasters. Floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea is a real opportunity for our steel industry and the wider supply chain in Wales, and it would also help mitigate the impact of the cost of living crisis for many Welsh businesses in that supply chain. If the government doesn't provide the necessary stability, we're going to see those platforms built in France and Spain and floated over to the Welsh coast, which would be absolutely unconscionable. So what is he doing to ensure that the Crown Estate leases will use local supply chains in Wales?
Mr. Speaker, I met with Crown Estates on a number of occasions to discuss the next bidding round for the sites which are out there in the Celtic Sea. Obviously, we hope to develop that industry. I actually agree with the brunt of the question, which is about the importance of developing a floating offshore wind industry off the coast of Wales. I've been trying to ensure that the supply chain is as local as possible, and that's why we've supported the conversations between developers and Crown Estates, and also why I personally have visited Pembrokeshire to ensure that the growth deal there supports the new infrastructure, the dock, which can allow those projects to be floated out to sea. So we're actually doing a great deal to support the floating offshore wind industry in Wales.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
For Harlech Food Service, a key business in my constituency, the news last week that the UK Government are slashing their energy support for businesses was devastating. They're already struggling under soaring energy bills and interest rate hikes in coronavirus business interruption loan scheme repayments. Can he clarify, will any support be forthcoming on CBILS repayments? And will any savings the Treasury make due to falling wholesale gas prices be ring-fenced for targeted support for SMEs and vulnerable households?
Speaker, I first of all hope the Honourable Lady will recognise that over the last year the Government have done an enormous amount to support businesses with a guaranteed energy price. The Government have been very clear. Well, the Government have been very clear that this support package cannot continue at the current level after April, when the next financial year begins. But the Government have said that they'll be making clear fairly shortly what the new package will look like. Unfortunately, no government anywhere in the Western world is going to be in a position to completely underwrite and subsidise energy costs for all businesses for an indefinite period of time. So we have to confront some realities here. But I hope the Honourable Lady will also be supportive of the fact that the Government are trying to do more to develop energy security within the United Kingdom. And that's why I wonder if she talked to some of her colleagues in the SNP about their opposition to opening up further oil and gas projects in the North Sea, which could...
I would have appreciated an answer on CBILS as well, but we all know that extortionate energy costs are part of this Tory winter of discontent, bookending 13 years of deliberate austerity. Key workers are striking and real incomes are in free fall. Following the last budget, funding for Welsh public services will be worth £3 billion less over the next 3 years. Enough is enough, and cutting key workers' salaries is not the right answer. Will he urge the Treasury to reverse this decline by establishing a truly fair funding system for Wales, which recognises our nation's needs, taking into account age, disability and poverty levels?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady will surely be aware that the Welsh Government is receiving £1.20 for public services per head for every pound that is spent in England. And that's why it is so difficult to understand why not only are there waiting lists longer in Wales, but the educational outcomes are lower in Wales. And that's after more than 20 years of a Labour government. And I would say to the Honourable Lady in Plaid Cymru, perhaps it's time that Plaid Cymru started standing up for the people of Wales and holding the Welsh Labour government to account instead of propping them up in the Senedd.
Hold on, Ems.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues on research funding for universities in Wales, and we are committed to making the UK a science superpower backed by almost £40 billion, the largest ever R&D budget. And last week, actually at the suggestion of the Honourable Member, I was very pleased to visit the cutting-edge research at Bangor University. I remain committed to Welsh universities capitalising on the funding opportunities available.
Thanks to the Secretary of State for that answer, and he has seen for himself that Welsh universities can and do deliver world-class research, but I think he would accept that the research funding that they actually get is less perhaps than one would expect, and I accept that this is not a simple matter. It's not a matter of counting heads. But what practical help can he give to increase research support in Wales, particularly for new and innovative projects such as the ones that he saw in Bangor?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in terms of practical support, what I want to do is to visit every single university in Wales over the next few months. I've already met with the UKRI to make clear my concern at the relatively low percentage of grant funding that is going into Welsh universities for research projects. I want to bring UKRI and those Welsh universities together at an event to Tŷ Gwydyr later on in this year. And given the honourable gentleman's own commitment to this particular issue, I would like to try and ensure that he is invited to that event as well and is able to attend.
Sir Vale.
Well, my right honourable friend agree with me that international collaboration is something in which Britain and indeed Wales has a proud history, and that will he continue to keep the pressure up on the European Commission to allow us to associate with the Horizon programme, which would make such a difference for the future of British science?
Mr. Speaker, I agree absolutely with what the honourable gentleman is saying, I would support the Horizon programme, but if for any reason, because of intransigence in the European Union, it's not possible to do that, I will be making the case to UKRI that Welsh universities can produce some of the best research in this country and should be receiving a higher percentage of the money that is currently available than they're getting at the moment.
Sir Christopher Bryant.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I would congratulate the honourable gentleman on his knighthood in the New Year's honours list. Mr. Speaker, we remain committed to working with the Welsh Government on the delivery of investment zones for Wales. This is alongside the freeports programme, which will facilitate growth and innovation through benefits like tax reliefs for businesses.
Well, that's all very well, but the government has basically completely binned its investment zone policy. I've had a letter from a government minister saying it's all being refocused. It's not about housing and planning anymore. It's about productivity, improving growth and job creation, but there are no details available. All the bids have been binned. So isn't this just further evidence that we don't have a government in this country anymore? We've just got a bunch of rapscallions squatting in ministerial offices.
I can't agree with him on those comments. As he will know, many elements of the policy concerned are devolved in Wales, and therefore discussions continue with Welsh Government on those aspects. And I would highlight to him there are 5,400 similar zones in other parts of the world, and we must deliver growth for Britain in a similar fashion.
Chair of the committee, Stephen Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I echo the Minister's congratulations to the member for Rhondda on his knighthood. One of the lessons of industrial policy over the last 30 years in Wales, certainly when you look at the number of failed food parks, science parks, technology parks, is that using taxpayers' money on its own does not create economic activity out of thin air. So does the Minister agree with me that whatever interventions we make or Welsh Government make has to work with the grain of the private sector? And to that end, does he recognise that the overriding strength of the Celtic Freeport bid is that it does work with real projects, real industry to deliver floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is a strong campaigner for the offshore wind possibilities in South West Wales. He will know that there are decisions ongoing in terms of freeports awarding, with at least one due in Wales and an announcement to be made shortly.
Bye-bye, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the spending review period, the UK Government is providing the Welsh Government with 20% more funding per person than equivalent UK Government spending in other parts of the UK. And as a result of the autumn statement, Welsh Government funding is increasing by around £1.2 billion over the next 2 years. This is on top of the additional £2.5 billion a year average over the 3-year spending review.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, the UK Government's Shared Prosperity Fund shortchanges Wales by £1 billion over 3 years, even though the Secretary of State and his predecessors repeatedly promised that Wales would receive not a penny less to replace EU funds. Those funds were used by Welsh Government to deliver 5,000 apprenticeships a year. So why is the Minister now letting down young people in Wales like this?
Well, the Honourable Lady, in fact, will know that the Shared Prosperity Fund is extremely generous to Wales and does replace all of that money that was coming from the European Union. There have been some fantastic announcements in recent weeks as to how the fund will progress. She will also know an array of other funding schemes through UK Government, including the Growth Deal, and I do hope to be in her constituency in early February for the groundbreaking milestone event for Pentre Hywel, and I hope she may be able to join me at that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the Welsh Government receiving the largest devolution funding settlement, it has the worst performing Labour-run NHS. Instead of spending on what matters, it plans to spend £32 million on a 20-mile-an-hour blanket speed policy. Such a policy will also cost the economy £4.5 billion. So would my honourable friend agree with me and 94% of my survey constituents to say this is yet another example of a Labour waste of money?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think my honourable friend is quite right. This policy is not a good way to spend money, and it's in fact not deliverable either. And in terms of the NHS, as an NHS GP working in North East Wales, I can tell her that the delivery of NHS services is shocking in many senses, and we need Welsh Government to improve their performance drastically.
Shadow Minister Gerald Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As my honourable friend for Llanelli has just reminded the House, the Secretary of State, Minister and his predecessors repeatedly promised that Wales would receive not a penny less to replace EU structural funds to Wales. Not only has he failed to deliver that promise, record inflation his government is presiding over has resulted in a double whammy on the Welsh Government budget. Is the Minister aware that higher education has been shut out of his government's flagship levelling up process and hundreds of jobs are now at risk, possibly as many as 600? So why is his government continually letting down people, including young people, across Wales?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I joined the Secretary of State on a visit to Bangor University last week, and it is absolutely important that we ensure that there are funding mechanisms going forward for higher education. There's an array of schemes through BEIS, and it's important that he and the government work on ensuring that the university sector is supported in Wales.
Andy Chamberlain.
7, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet members on a range of transport measures. Over £340 million has been provided for rail enhancements in Wales, including at Cardiff Central Station and for the electrification of the Severn Tunnel.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's failure to end rail strikes impacts all of us across the UK. Like Scotland, transport is devolved in Wales, but we need people coming from England into our countries to give much-needed revenue for tourism and hospitality. In Wales, a pay agreement has been reached, but their own railways can't function on strike days because of UK-managed maintenance responsibilities. So the Secretary of State outlined what he's doing to resolve these damaging strikes and get railways up and running again.
Mr. Speaker, I must confess I failed to hear very much of that question, and I apologise for that. I heard the Honourable Lady ask what I was going to do to get railways up and running again. I'm not particularly certain which one she was referring to. It puts me in a slightly difficult position as far as answering is concerned. But I will honestly say to the Honourable Lady, we've spent £340 million on railways over this control period, including £125 million on the Core Valley lines, £4.7 million on St Clear Station, £4 million on the Bow Street Station, £2.7 million on the Cambrian line. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, we've spent money on projects such as the electrification of the South Wales line. The Cardiff Capital Region South Wales Metro is funded partly from the UK Government through a growth deal, and our commitment to the railways is...
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Direct train services between South Wales and Devon are a key part of our rail infrastructure, yet are mostly operated by older, less reliable rolling stock. What does he see for the prospects being to getting new, more modern trains operating these routes?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to be able to tell the honourable gentleman that more modern stock is currently being rolled out on those particular routes. So the honourable gentleman will be able to benefit from more comfortable carriages, which are also going to emit less carbon and therefore be better for the environment.
Jerome Mayo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Roads are a devolved matter, and the decision to close the Menai Suspension Bridge was therefore made by the Welsh Government. Work has commenced on the emergency replacement of brittle hangars dating back to 1938, and this will be followed by additional maintenance works. Welsh Government ministers assure me that, subject to safety assessments, the bridge is due to reopen at the end of this month.
Jerome Mayo.
Mr. Speaker, the Menai Bridge supplies the lifeblood of tourism to Anglesey and the wider region. Given Welsh Labour's negligent handling of the maintenance of this bridge and now its closure for months, how does my right honourable friend think Welsh Labour is doing on their manifesto commitment to rebuild tourism in Wales?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question. Quality road infrastructure is vital to unlocking the potential of the North Wales visitor economy. I do believe there are questions to be answered about the specification of the contracted PFI maintenance schedule for the bridge, awarded by the last Labour UK government in 1998, and about the stalled consideration of a third crossing of the Menai Strait. I urge the Welsh Government to publish the findings of the roads review and resume the improvement of the North Wales road network.
Vital Fabricant.
Question 9, sir.
Mr Speaker, I have regular discussions with the Welsh Government on increasing investment in Wales and supporting the Welsh economy. Our plans to release one Welsh freeport alongside our investment in infrastructure will act as a catalyst for further investment from the UK and beyond.
Vital Fabricant.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for his answer. During COVID, a number of Welsh nationalists, not all but some, used that opportunity in the closure of the Welsh border to incite anti-English feeling. And now we hear that Plaid Cymru, working with Labour, are going to introduce a hotels and other tax. What does he think that does for English investment into Wales?
Well, Mr Speaker, I want to see people visiting Wales from England and from all over the world, and I'm sure that all those who do so will appreciate the natural beauty and all that Wales has to offer to the tourism industry. So I was disappointed that there were some people who appeared to be indulging in anti-English rhetoric during the COVID crisis. I hope all members of this House, I think, would condemn that sort of behaviour. And I would simply say I want to do more to encourage tourism, and that's why I regret the fact that the Welsh Labour Government are bringing in a tourism tax. A tax on tourism is an attack on the tourist industry.
The Government.
You, Mr Speaker, on the subject of investment between England and Wales, progress on speeding up the Wrexham to Bidston line is about as slow as the trains on the Wrexham to Bidston line. So can I ask the Secretary of State for Wales what he personally has done to improve rail connections between North Wales and Liverpool?
Mr Speaker, I'm sure I speak for the whole government in saying that we are completely committed to better rail connections across the United Kingdom. I'm well aware of the line between Wrexham and Bidston. I'm also aware that went through a business case procedure, which was not completely positive about it.